Believe it or not, this is week 9 of the Sniblets. We started on a Tuesday, so this is Sniblet number 40. So this week we'll be doing Sniblets 40 through 44, believe it or not. Man, time flies. Update on the COVID card tourney 2020. I pulled into the lead. I have now won 57. Julie is at 52. But we're a long ways from over. So we're going to keep battling. Dan, 57, Julie, 52. She takes losing a lot better than I do. Hey, shout out to my mom yesterday, Mother's Day. I think she's the only one that's probably listened to every single one of these sniblets. So thanks, Mom. Funny tweet of the day says this: we've been giving my 4-year-old $1 for every time she does a chore. She leaves the dollar in random places and forgets about it. So we've just been using the same dollar over and over. You call it unfair. I call it finders keepers and teachable value life lessons. There you go. Isn't that great? Here's $1 for every chore you do. They're using the same dollar. Love it. Well, we have been looking. Well, hey, I didn't give you your question. Here's your question. Where did your family originally come from? I think mine originated in Germany / Scotland, from different sides of the fence. So where did your family originally come from? Dialogue about that. It's kind of a fun walk down memory lane. Well, let's review. We've been looking at life lessons from Joseph. We looked at last week at Genesis chapter 37 through Genesis chapter 41. We saw that jealousy led to hatred. Joseph was sold. He falls in the hands of a slave owner. He's falsely accused of misconduct. And yet Joseph remained unoffendable. He had this uncanny ability to keep his eyes fixed on the bigger story outside the smaller story. And finally, through interpreting dreams, Joseph goes from the prison to the palace as arguably the most powerful person in the kingdom. Now we pick it up, and I would like to ask you to read Genesis chapter 41 and just verses 50 through 57. So push the pause button, read Genesis chapter 41, verses 50 through 57, and then we'll discuss it. During the 7 years of plenty, Joseph gets married to Asenath. He and Asenath have 2 sons. The first son, his name is Manasseh. Isn't it interesting how he names his sons after events that God has orchestrated? So in Manasseh means God has made me forget all my trouble and my broken past. What a great name. Manasseh is named by Joseph as a visual reminder of God's goodness and redemption. Then later on, Joseph and Asenath name their second son Ephraim. And again, they name Ephraim after an event that God has orchestrated, which means, Ephraim, God has made me prosper in a land where I was initially experiencing affliction. And who could argue with that? Sold, enslaved, imprisoned because of false accusations. He experienced 13 years of affliction. Ephraim is a walking visual aid that God brings life out of despair. And then in verse 53, notice it says, when the 7 years of plenty which had been in the land of Egypt came to an end, Joseph is now 37 years of age. Question, what's a visual aid of God's faithfulness in your life? They're all around us. Maybe you just haven't named them. You probably didn't name your child after an event that God orchestrated. We name our kids Biffy and Buffy and, after just fun names. But maybe there's some things in your life that represent events that God orchestrated. I've got a coffee mug that was passed down. The date on the bottom says 1961. That was when I was born. It was originally used by my grandfather. To me, it's a visual aid of God's faithfulness from generation to generation. Now in verses 55 through 57, the world is seeing the full consequence of a worldwide famine. And interesting, Egypt becomes the center of the world, and the world is at the mercy of one man, Joseph. And God uses Joseph to save the world. You know, in the Old Testament, there was something that was called typology, where there were individuals that were type of something to come. And Joseph was a type of Christ. He was a redeemer. He was a guy who restored things to the way they should be. He was a type of Christ. Interesting, he had the keys to the storehouse, the grain elevators that would produce bread. I think there's some symbolism there. You know, God is the bread of life, signifying it's a foretaste of to the world of the coming of the Messiah, who would be the ultimate bread of life. And here's Joseph, a type of Christ, who has the keys to the grain elevator, and he's the one who has the bread of their physical life. You know, the book of the Queen Esther, that would be written several hundred years later, coined the phrase, "For such a time as this." Joseph, for such a time as this, he went through horrible circumstances, and yet when his godliness intersected with those horrible circumstances, what you have is you have influence. And there's a pattern throughout history. When horrible circumstances collide with godliness, what you have is you have influence. In your own life today, there's been some horrible circumstances. They've collided with your godliness. And now trust God to see it through for influence. Great topic to sit around and discuss. What's the horrible circumstances? How could God collide that with the godliness of you as an individual or your family? And how does he want to use this through you to influence others? Well, it's a cold Monday out there. I've got on my flannel shirt. Spend some time with the Lord asking that question. Horrible circumstances, godly intersection equals influence. Have a great Monday. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning.